Hey everyone, Nick and Kyle here, teaming up to help you build better text templates in After Effects.
That's right. We recently got a bunch of cool new expressions capabilities that really help streamline things and open up new possibilities. We're going to show you how these new features work and walk through a template build step by step.
This is a long one, but make sure to stick around. At the end, we'll have a conversation with John Colombo, who is a senior quality engineer on the After Effects team.
We'll talk about the future of text expressions and give you a little bonus that you can use in your projects today. Okay, everyone, to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to start by laying out some context and covering a few of the basics. If you already know this stuff, feel free to jump ahead. So I have a text layer here in After Effects, and of course I could select a word and maybe set that to bold and change the color to this lovely blue here. And that's great for this one layer. If I want this to be accessible in any other way, I'm going to need to set up some additional controls. Basically, what I'm looking for is for these properties in the text and paragraph panels to be more flexible and accessible. Now, I could open this up in the Essential Graphics panel and drop my source text into there. And there is this option here for Edit Properties. And if you enable these, you can select custom fonts, font size, and faux styles. And that makes these accessible either here in After Effects or when you pass this through as a MOGRT. However, the problem here is that the font selection gives you access to literally every font on the machine. And while options are good, you don't want your editors to get too creative. Having a size slider is really handy, but you also, again, kind of get almost too much of an option here. It makes this hard to lock this in for any kind of brand standard, and you really can't connect this to anything else, which you might want to do with a more dynamic template. To get the kind of control we're after, we'll need to write some expressions, and while they certainly can get complex, they don't have to be. Any source text property can have an expression. You just Alt or Option click on it like anywhere else, and by default, it will just go ahead and enter text.sourceText. That's just referencing itself. Now, for a simple example, you could just add something that will always be present no matter what we type in. Like, I'll just type a plus, and then in quotation marks, I'll add an exclamation point. And now it's going to always add that exclamation point no matter what I type in here. Let's just change that to something else. Simple enough, right? But it gives you some building blocks to work with. Another easy approach is to link one layer's source text to another. So without even needing to Alt or Option click, you can just use the Properties pick whip right here and link this layer's source text to this other one. And you'll see it copies the actual text itself, but in this case, not the look of it. Let's open up this code and take a look. So this comp.layer, you can copy me. Yep, that's that one, text.sourceText. Okay, so it's copying the text. Now, if you want to copy the look instead, you can add .style to the end. Now you're copying the style of that layer, but retaining the original text that this layer had. By default, it's going to be referencing the first character, but there are ways to pull that from somewhere else if you like. In this example, you can see I have very similar code. I've just written it a little differently. I created a variable called myText, and it just links to that other layer's source text. And now I've called on that variable and said .style. And so it's pulling the style from that first character. If I instead want to pull it from this area to pull this style, I could change .style to getStyleAt, and then I need to declare which character index I'm going to pull that from. Character index is just the count. You start at 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I enter 4, 5, or 6, I should get that capitalized white look. Now, this isn't that flexible yet, but it's a stepping stone for all the cool stuff we're about to get into. In addition to controlling what the actual displayed text is, we can also control specific things about this text. So like I said earlier, starting to pull these properties in a controllable way. Let's come down here and enter a quick expression. I'll create a variable called myText, and then just link that back to its own source text. Come down here and just type myText. So right now, this expression isn't doing much. It's basically just referencing itself, but it gives us a way to actually work with this. If I type .style right here, again, now this is just referencing its own style, but this gives us a gateway to start changing things about that style, like the font size. I'll just type .setFontSize, take advantage of the autocomplete, and I'll just type a number in there, like 50. There we go. Now we have a controllable font size that's overriding what we originally set in the text properties. And that's great, but of course, hard coding values aren't that accessible. So what if I right click, Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control. Let's go ahead and rename this to Font Size. And now all we need to do is link this to our expression. So I'll come in here, get rid of that hard-coded value, and pick whip to that slider. Now, this slider value controls the font size. And that's great. You can keyframe that. That's useful already. But once again, if we put this in Essential Graphics, now I can drop the slider up here, and this could pass through to a MOGRT or anywhere else using this as essential properties. The real power here is that you can edit the range of expression controls. So if I wanted this to only be able to be set between 80 and 120, for example, I can set that slider range there. And now I've restricted those controls so that this works within our template or respects our brand standards. Another useful property you can set is the font itself. Someone got a little too creative here, so let's go ahead and just set that to a specific font. You can actually come over to the expression flyout and choose text, font, and then just choose from any of the fonts on your system. I'll go back to that Helvetica LT Bold. That's what we want. Hit OK. And now as soon as I close out of this, it's going to take my text layer right here and set the font to Helvetica LT Bold. There we go. The more interesting version of this is using a drop-down menu control to create a selectable list of approved fonts that can be part of your template controls. Looking at the code here, I've created a variable called font select, and that just links to that drop-down menu. I've created a few variables called font1 and font2, and those are my Helvetica LT and Bold. Just a simple conditional here. If my selector is set to 1, then choose option 1, otherwise choose option 2. And then we feed that into that font selection right here. So looking at our menu, we just have the two options. And if you click edit on the drop-down menu, you can see option 1 is Helvetica Regular. It doesn't matter. You can actually enter whatever you like in here. After Effects actually only cares about the numbers, but you want these labels to be helpful. And this is great for changing the font of the entire block of text. Until recently, if you wanted to be able to change the style of only part of a text layer, you needed a slightly convoluted setup where you've linked the source text of one layer to another, but changed the style on the second one. For example, this layer is bolded. And now I've created a text animator on the one that's visible right now, so it will cut away a word that I select. In this case, starting from index 0, word number 1 is only. And so if I select that, the second layer has a sort of inverted text animator that makes it only show that one. And this works okay, but as you can see here, the spacing already gets a little wonky, and these are just two versions of the same typeface. To make this actually work properly, we're going to need a different approach. Fortunately, that now exists, and Nick is going to tell you all about it.
Thanks, Kyle. These text styles are super helpful and have been around since 2020. But the brand new feature in 2025 is the ability to set a character range. We can get and set the style for every individual letter inside a text layer. The new per character text styling lets us do things that we could never do before with text animators. For example, this text is Helvetica with a white font. We can use text style expressions to set a default style for the entire block of text. But now we can also add a specific range. So we can target letters 0 through 3 or 0 through 5 and only update those. You can think about text style expressions as your override. The source text on the layer is the primary setting, and then you can override that entire block of text or the range with text style expressions. You can even chain multiple style methods together, and they'll process in the order that you wrote them to update each setting. We can even use a combo of style expressions and text animators for more advanced control. Alright, so why bother with style expressions instead of using normal text animators? Let's check out this example of horizontal scaling. I have two layers that are scaling in two different ways, and this really shows off why these style expressions are so helpful. The top layer is using a text animator to scale the first word, and as our selected word is scaling, it's not going to shift the other words around it. When we change the text animator scale value, you can see that none of the other words track or scale with it. Now, with the updated style expressions, we are able to set the horizontal scale property of the text, and the entire text layer responds by shifting the surrounding words correctly. This is working the same as if we had adjusted the horizontal scale inside the character or properties panels. And instead of hard coding this expression, we could create a variable called xScale, pick whip a slider control, and then animate that slider control to scale those words. This is going to be super helpful for animation. Now that you've got the basics, let's change the font to bold for a specific character range. In this example, my text is set to Helvetica, and I want to change some of these words to a different font. So let's write .style at the end. Now we can start to add style attributes. I'll write .setFont, and this works just like Kyle showed earlier. We need to add the exact system font name that your computer understands. So I'll go to the arrow, text, font, and then scroll through, and I'll pick this font Omnes, and then change the weight to bold. And then when I click out, the entire layer will update to that font. Okay, cool, but we want to use the per character style expressions. To do that, we add a comma after the font name, and then 0, 3. And now only those first 3 letters are being changed to Omnes Bold, and the rest stay as they were before. This first number after the font is the start index, and then the second number is the length. We can change that to 6, and now those 6 characters are updated. If you don't include this second value for length, then it will start at this index and fill out the rest of the layer no matter how long it is. Okay, now our bold style is starting at the 10th character, and let's add a length of 6. I'll count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is very important. A space is a character, so make sure to count it. 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's starting at that space, and then proceeding for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I change this 10 to 11 and the 6 to a 1, then we can see that it's only updating the F, which is the 11th character, and 12, and 13. In order to target this entire word that says font, we just count forward to 11. So let's update the start index to 11, and we want the length to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll change this to 11 and 4, and now that word is updated. Instead of choosing a different font like Omnes Bold, let's set this word to a bold version of Helvetica. So if I turn the expression off, we can see that Helvetica has all these different options. I'll select Helvetica Black, and that's the font that I want to use for my bold. I'll set the full text layer back to regular and turn our expression back on. And select this text string. We can come over to the arrow text font, and this time I'll select Helvetica, but change the font weight from regular to black and hit OK. And now our word is bolded appropriately. That's the basic formula for styling character ranges. Let's make this more interesting and chain multiple style expressions together. For example, we can change the color of our bolded word. Let's come over to Effect, Expression Controls, Color Control, and add that to our layer. Then inside the expression, I'll create a variable called myColor and pick whip it. At the bottom, we can add .setFillColor. And inside the parentheses, we need to input a color value. We can use the variable we created. And then we'll set the range and use the same start index and length from before. So I can say 11 to 4, and there we go. Now if we change that color control, it updates the bolded word. We now have 2 separate style attributes. And as we add more, it would be annoying to have to write these numbers every time. So let's link those up to sliders for better control. Come up to Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control, and name it Start Index. Duplicate it, and this one is the length, or the number of characters after the start. So I'll call this one numChars. And let's set start index to 11 and numChars to 4, just like we have in our expression. At the top, create a new variable called start index and pick whip the first slider, and then do the same thing for numChars. And don't forget to add semicolons at the end of each line. Now we can replace the 11 and 4 with the appropriate variables. And now as we move the start slider, it moves the entire pattern back and forth. And changing the numChars slider will adjust the length. From just these 2 sliders, we can easily control which letters are affected. And the best part is that with just a few slider keyframes, we can animate the bold shifting through the entire layer and have full control over the timing and easing of our animation. Since we linked the character indexes to sliders, there's no fancy math or other code needed for animation. We can just edit the curves of our slider controls with the graph editor, and it all works perfectly. Here's the super cool part. Once you've built this basic structure, all of the other style properties work the same way. You can see all of the style attributes that you can set in expressions by coming to the arrow, text, styling, text methods. For example, we can write a new line and use .setHorizontalScaling just like before. And this method requires a number for the scale value, so I'll set 120 and add our ranges at the end, and we can copy and paste that and write set tracking. A tracking of 120 is way too high, so let's actually do -50. And we can add another line for set all caps. This one expects a true/false value, so I'll put true. And there we go, they all operate together. And our keyframes still work to animate everything. One thing to keep in mind is if you chain many style methods together like this, performance will be slow. In general, setting your text directly with the character/properties panels is the best performance because it is your base setting. Using text animators would give you a slight performance hit, whereas using any style expressions will generally be slower than a basic text animator. And chaining multiple style expressions together will be the slowest option. This might not matter for you, but it is something to be aware of. So that's a general overview of text methods and per character styling. Hey Kyle, are there any other settings we should talk about?
Well, there's one in particular that has already saved me a ton of time. Nick just showed you this big list of properties that you can set, and you'll notice that most of them have a value, a start index, and the number of characters, but a few of them don't just because that's the way that they work. And if you come down to the paragraph methods, you'll see the same thing. These just set once and they don't have a range because they apply to the whole block of text. There's one of these that I'm the most excited about, and it's called justification. This is when you're setting your paragraph to be aligned left, center, or right. Alignment and justification are technically slightly different things, but these expressions accomplish both with the term justification. And at least for me, even if I weren't using any of these other features, this is definitely my justification for bothering to learn these expressions, because the old way of doing this was pretty annoying. Previously, if we wanted the ability to choose between these in a template, we needed to create 3 different versions of the same text layer and then create some way to control which of those is actually visible using some conditional expressions. And that's okay, but if you start making more complex templates, now you've got 3 places to test and to update anytime you need to make changes. No thanks. But now we can set that with expressions. I'll just add .setJustification, and then this is expecting a string, but they're actually pretty easy to remember. In quotes, start typing a line and then choose the one you want. So as soon as I click out of this code, it's going to left align my text. If I want to change this to right, I just need to highlight that and then type in right. There we go. So you could force your text to always be justified a certain way, or if you want to be able to switch this, we could set this up with a drop-down menu, for example. I'll just let this one choose between left and right, hit OK. I'll create a variable called menu and link that to the drop-down control. Then I'll write a simple conditional expression where if menu equals 1, then a variable called justify equals align left. Otherwise, it equals align right. And then I just need to swap out that hard-coded align left for justify. And now if I change this drop-down menu, it chooses between left and right alignment. To set this up for all 3 options, it's very similar. It's just a bit cleaner to write this as an array instead of an if-else statement. I've created a variable called myArray, and then I listed out align left, align center, and align right. And because of the way code counts, those will be 0, 1, and 2 in this array. To actually call on that below, I just need to type myArray and then tell it which option from the array to choose. Of course, hard coding isn't very flexible, so let's tie this to a drop-down menu instead. I'll name this menu and then link it to my drop-down. And then down below the array, let's create another variable called justify. As a reminder, these drop-down menus start counting at 1, 1, 2, 3. I find this more intuitive. It would be nice if they aligned, but here we are. So to get that to line up, we simply need to take that menu value -1. And then down below, we can just call on that justify variable we just made. This will take whichever value the menu is set to -1. Let's set this to left, which is option 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, so that tells the code to choose option 0, which is left. Make sense? Now this works for left, center, right. This works just fine. We could clean up the code just a little bit if we want, just by reducing some of this. And we actually don't need to call this a separate variable. We could just take this little bit of code right here, copy paste this into right here, and get rid of that extra variable. There we go, same functionality. One important thing to note is that at the time of this recording, you should always set the justification as the last or bottom styling property. If you put anything else below it, it might not work properly. Also, align left and align right are currently backwards if you use a language that writes right to left. So if you do use one of those, that would be a great thing to submit or upvote as a feature request in the Adobe forums. We'll leave a link to that down in the description. All right, I'm going to toss this back to Nick so he can combine what we've done so far and get this exported as a motion graphics template.
Alright, so we're back in After Effects, and here I have our combined block of code. Our variables are up here at the top. Here's our paragraph menu and array, and then we're setting the style and all of these style methods. And finally, the paragraph justification at the very bottom as the last step. Now let's export it as a MOGRT. So come to Window, Essential Graphics, and let's start taking controls and putting them into the Essential Graphics panel. We can just right-click and go to Add Property to Essential Graphics. We can edit these controls in the panel, and we'll have access to all of these same controls inside the MOGRT once it's in Premiere. To bring the text in, we could drag and drop the source text, but we get a warning. Whatever Essential Graphics changes you make to the text will override your entire expression. Because we have an expression on the source text, we could end up with errors in our MOGRTs, and we would definitely get errors inside After Effects if we tried to use this composition with essential properties. So let's hit OK, and instead of dragging this text in directly, I'll delete that, and instead I'll come over and create a new text layer called Input Text. I'll leave that in the corner, and then come down and toggle it open, and pick whip the myText variable to the source text field of our new input text. And nothing happens yet, but come down to Style and add .setText myText. And now everything that we type into input text gets sent into our original text layer. Let's name this layer input text and change the label color to stay organized. And if we turn off that expression, we still have our original text saved in that layer. So let's copy that and paste our original text back into the text input and then turn our expression back on. Now we can drag our input text into the Essential Graphics panel and enable all the font settings. And now when we edit it inside the panel, we're able to update the text and change all of our style settings without any errors. I'll turn the eyeball off on our input text layer because we don't need to see it and it doesn't need to render. We're just using it for that input text control in the Essential Graphics panel. We're finally done with adding controls. To export the MOGRT, we'll give it a name. I'll call this Style Expressions, and then come down to Export Motion Graphics Template, save the project. The local templates folder is the default MOGRT location, so I'll save there. This warning says my Helvetica font is not synced via Adobe fonts, so anyone who uses this MOGRT is going to need that font installed locally on their computer. But for this example, that's fine, don't worry about it. Finally, let's hop over to Premiere and make sure this thing actually works. Alright, so I'm in Premiere and I'll come up to Window, Graphics, Templates. In Premiere 2025, the old Essential Graphics panel has been split into the Graphics Templates browser and the Properties panel for editing MOGRTs and graphics. Our MOGRT is right at the top of the Graphics Templates folder because it's the last thing we exported. So let's drag it down to our sequence. It imports correctly, and when we select it, all of our controls show up in the Properties panel. We should test all of our controls to make sure they work. We can edit this text to say anything we want. It looks like paragraph alignment and color work great. And we can slide our index through and change the characters that are being affected. And of course, because it's a motion graphics template, we can duplicate it on the timeline, select this other instance, and edit it completely separate from our first MOGRT clip. This looks like a hell of a convenient MOGRT.
Awesome, thanks Nick. These style expressions really give you some powerful options to level up your templates and to make it much easier to build the kind of stuff that at least my clients keep asking for.
Totally. You can go pretty far with what we've already showed you. But there are still a few ways to make these even more usable and give yourself more flexibility when building. What else have you got, Kyle?
These expressions are very cool, but let's not forget about our old friend text animators. While they don't have access to as many of the type properties, they're still very useful for template work, and in many cases, it can be pretty smart to combine them with the style expressions. Like Nick said, these text animators will process a bit faster, and they can also do some things the expressions can't. Let's see how we can make these work together. You can also think of these as another override. Even though it's called an animator, you don't have to animate anything. You can just use it to apply a constant change. You'll see that I have some plain white text here, and at the bottom of the properties panel, or over here in this little animate flyout, you can click on this and choose any property you want to animate. I'll choose fill color and RGB because this will be really easy to see. It defaults to red, but let's choose that same nice blue we've been using. And now the entire block of text is blue, overriding the color set up here, which is white. Coming back down to my timeline, I'll open up this range selector, and this is how you can determine which portions of your piece of text are being affected by that change. Now, these percentages can be very helpful, but not with what we're doing. So I'll twirl open Advanced and change this units from percentage to index. Now we're talking. Let's set this up to a whole number. And so now from character 3, remember 0, 1, 2, 3, through character 9 is getting this change. Right now, all I'm doing is the blue color, but I could start adding other properties. And that's one thing that's really cool about this, is that you can do the same change and apply multiple things to it. So I'll scale these down and maybe also add a skew. And then I can just come up here and change this range around, maybe set this up to 12. And now that's the range being changed. And hopefully you can see how this can be matched up with what we've been doing with the expressions. Here's the same setup you just saw Nick build with input text and then a start index and num characters sliders down here. Just to prove a quick point, let's add an animator for fill color again. And I just want you to see that this actually happens after all of those style expressions. So if I open up the range selector and let's just set this to a smaller amount, like 12 to 15, that's actually happening after the blue is being set inside those expressions. So you could use that to your advantage if it comes up. But just to show you how these work together, let's add position and just move that up a little bit. We'll say that this is the styling that we're looking for and not the fill color. So now I need to make my start and end line up with these other sliders that I've already created. Let's close this advanced just to make things easier. To get these to line up, you really just need some very basic expressions. If you want to use these as your main controllers, all you need to do is just link your range selector to that. So you can link your start value to that start index. And then for end, instead of this end index, we just need to do a little bit of easy math here. So let's alt-click to create an expression and then say start index plus number of characters, and we'll end up at the same place. Now we can change this, and those same two things will be all lined up. If you'd like to go the other direction, you just have to do it the other way around. Let's say that we want start index and number of characters to follow the range selector. Instead of those sliders, we could actually just do this math right here. Start index, let's just change that to find that start value right here. And then number of characters, instead of being its own slider, what we actually need is that end value minus start index. And that'll get us to the same place. You'll see that's set 12 to 15. So if I want that back where it was, 8 to 17, there we go. Before I wrap up, I do want to point out that creating a manual line break by pressing Enter actually appears to throw this counting off. That's something to take into account if you're planning to combine these two things. Nick's upcoming example does include a way to solve this, though. Ultimately, neither way is better. It's just more a question of which counting method makes sense to you and to the people you're building this for. As for whether you should use animators versus expressions, you saw that a property like scale actually has a different behavior depending on where it's applied. But for something more straightforward like fill color, which one makes sense to you? Personally, if I have additional levels of options in a template, like a stroke width that varies depending on which fill color the user chooses, it might be easier to logic your way through that when you don't need to put all of that code in one place. Of course, that's also creating separate places that you need to check and update. Either way, options are good, right? The text animator can also be applied by word or by line, which is great, except currently these style expressions only count by characters. Fortunately, Nick's got that covered too.
I sure do. Okay, in this section, we'll continue where Kyle left off. We're going to link the style expression and text animator ranges and fix the line break problem. Here is the same expression from before. I just removed the input text layer and the set text command. That way I can edit directly for this tutorial. The text animator is currently offset by 1 character. This happens because of a fundamental difference between text style expressions and text animators. Text style expressions count line breaks as a character index, but text animators don't. This might get fixed in a future version of After Effects so these both operate the same, but for now we have to work around it. I'll create a new text layer so we can see what's going on, and link it to the main text layer. I'm going to show you something super useful. After my text, write dot slice parentheses 0, 5. This slice method is creating a range and slicing or discarding everything outside of that range. I can change this to say 8 through 9, and that gives us characters 8 through 9, which in this case is this capital A. Slice needs absolute indexes for the start and end values. So to get all these highlighted characters, we need to say 8 through 17. Let's create variables for start index and numchars inside this expression by pick whipping the sliders on our main text layer. Now inside slice, we can write start index and then start index plus numchars. And just like Kyle showed earlier, that gives us the same segment as our text style range. Or we could change this to say 0, start index. And that gives us all of the characters before the start index. We can update this text to say anything else and change our range values. Let's duplicate this layer and move it to the right as a second guide layer. In this layer, delete .slice and write .split parentheses and in quotes put a space. And that removes all spaces, creating an array of 3 individual elements. I'll make a variable called wordsArray, and on a new line, write wordsArray bracket 0. And that spits out the first element of the array, which is our first word. Kyle mentioned this earlier, but arrays are 0 indexed, meaning they start counting at 0. So if we type 1, it gives us the second element, and 2 gives us the third. If we go to 3, then it gives us nothing because there's no fourth element in this array. To count these elements, we can simply add .length, and when I click out, that gives us 3. Let's delete this words array and set this back to split. Instead of a space, we can split by line breaks. \r is a special command for return characters. So now we have an array split by line breaks. And just like the words array, we can count them with .length. Okay, let's change our main text back. Let's come down to the text animator offset and manually check it. When start index is on the first line, we need an offset of 0. But on the second line, we want an offset of -1. And on the third line, we want an offset of -2. I'll come back to guide 2 and change my text to our sliced layer. Now when I move that start index, it is counting the lines in our sliced range. This is perfect. Let's copy this expression and paste it down into the offset. And we can simplify all these variables because they're contained on this layer. Before this split, we can add that same sliced range of 0, start index. When I move start index back to line 2, our number of counted lines updates to 2. The offset is now counting the number of line breaks before our highlight. Let's give this a descriptive variable name, like countlines, and we can output countlines at the bottom. And we want this index to go backwards, so at the front, just add a minus sign. But now our offset has gone 1 character too far. So at the end, just add +1. And now our offset is correctly moving back by 1 character on the second line, and 2 on the third line. And when we come back to the first line, there are no line breaks to count, so that offset is correctly 0. So we're all done, right? Not exactly. If your highlight extends across multiple lines, the end index of the text animator is still 1 character too far. Let's copy all our variables and paste them into end, and we can rewrite this to use the slider variables. We need to do something similar, where we get this highlighted segment and count any line breaks inside it. We had this segment earlier in our guide layer by setting a range of start index through start index plus numchars. So we can just update this range inside the countlines variable to the same thing, because that range is this segment of the text. Now if we output countlines, that will give us a value of 2, because it counts 2 lines inside our highlight. So let's just subtract countlines from the final value, and then we can say -1 inside countlines to account for the first line of the text. And now we have the freedom to slide our ranges, and all the controls are properly linked. One final bit of advice for this setup. If we animate these sliders, the position text animator is moving slightly faster than the text style, and that's because of the decimal values on our sliders. Style expression ranges can't use decimals, they snap between characters. We can lock these sliders to whole numbers by writing math.round parentheses value, and then write the same thing on numchars. Now it will always snap between integers when animating, so you can use that if you need it. And there we go. This rig links together text style expressions and text animators, even across multiple lines. Okay, that was a whole lot. So far, we've been creating character ranges. You move a slider and it changes one letter at a time. But it's often more intuitive to select entire words. Word selection isn't automatically supported in Style Expressions, but we can get it there. We're going to ramp up the intensity, but follow along and by the end you'll have a fully functioning per word text style rig. In this example, I'll show you how to set up a single slider that can toggle through each word in your text layer to set the style. We'll start from scratch and use everything we learned so far. First, come up to Effects, Expression Controls, Slider Control. We'll call this Select Word. Then alt-click the source text and create the myText variable. Then type out var slider equals and pick whip the slider control. Then write myText at the bottom. Nothing changes because we're just outputting the same exact text that's already in our layer. What we need to do is we need to split this layer into a collection of words. We did this before with split, so let's do that again. And that removes all the spaces, creating 3 individual elements. So I'll make a variable for this called words array. And then on a new line, write words array bracket 0. Instead of typing in a number here, we can use our slider. And instead of 0 targeting the first word, I want the first word to be 1. So in the slider, just add -1. And now 1 gets the first word, 2 gets the second, 3 gets the third. Okay, if I turn this expression off, we can see the original text layer. And when I turn it on, we're able to target 1 word at a time. But right now, that word is just being output. Instead of outputting that word, we can save it into a new variable called myWord. So now we have our slider. We have our sentence split by spaces saved in words array. And then we have 1 word being targeted in that array called myWord. To see what's going on, let's use a fill color. At the bottom, write mytext.style.setFillColor and in parentheses, myColor. And let's add our effect color control and create our myColor variable linked to the color control by pick whipping it. And now those are linked and we can control the fill color. Now we need to target a range. Just like before, create a variable for start index. And this time, instead of numChars, I'll create a variable called word length. And then in setFillColor, add start index, word length. We need our variables to contain some numbers. So let's use our slider and a temp value of 5. If we use our slider, we can slide through this layer. But it's not sliding through each word, it's sliding through the characters one at a time. When I set this slider to 2, I want my entire color to jump to the second word. Let's comment out this last line, and at the bottom, write words array dot slice parentheses 0, 1. And interestingly, that gives us the first element of the array. I'll duplicate this layer and remove the expression, and then bring it up here and make it red. And that'll help us see what's going on. Slice is giving us that first element. If I change slice 01 to 02, then it gives us these 2 words or elements. We can change 0 to 1, and it skips the first element and only gives us the second element. If we say 0, 3, then it gives us elements 0 through 3. Okay, after slice, write dot join parentheses and add quotation marks with a space. And now we're undoing that split operation from before, but only getting the front section and removing the back section. Instead of hard-coding 2, let's use our slider. Remember, our slider is already subtracting 1. So to get all the words, we have to set the slider to 4. Slider 3 gives us 2 words, and 2 gives us just the first word. So in order to color the third word, all we have to do is count all the letters before it. So to target the word expressions, we need to count all these letters. At the end of words array, we can just write dot length, which gives us 10. We can count this to confirm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember to count spaces. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It ends at style. And then we have this gap right here because there's another space. So let's cut and paste this whole words array line into start index and uncomment out our final line setting the style. And there we go. Our fill color highlight is starting at this space and then moving forward 5 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the cool part. We can change the slider to 2 and it bumps back to the second word. And at 1, it's on the first word. The only problem now is the highlight is not filling out the word and it's hard-coded to this number 5. We can replace 5 with our variable, myword.length. Now when we select 3, it targets the third word and almost fills up that word. except as I said before, it's starting at that space, and so it's not hitting the end. So we can just add +1, and it targets the end of the word. And if we go back to 2, then it targets style. And if we go back to 1, then it targets text. And all of our problems are solved. If I change this text to say text style After Effects, then you see that third word is still highlighted. Or we can pop to number 4. I'll change this again and write text style expressions in After Effects. And if I set the slider back to word 3, you see that we have a strange problem where it is not counting that line break. The problem is that we're splitting this layer at spaces, not line breaks. So we could type .replace, quotes, \r, comma, quotes, space, and this is saying replace any line breaks with a space and then split by the spaces. It's not going to work in every case, and it's sort of a quick and dirty approach. So instead of splitting by the exact space character, we can split by a regex formula. To write a regex expression, we'll write /, and then a special character. We want to reference any white space characters, which are spaces, return characters, tabs, and line breaks. To target a white space, just write S. And then we close the regex expression with /G. Click out. And now, as we move that slider, it is working correctly with the line breaks, with the spaces, and we can target each word in our layer. And we can go ahead and delete this guide layer. Now that the rig is complete, we can add any other style methods at the bottom, and they will all work the same way as set fill color. Let's add the bold font at the bottom, just like we learned before. .set font, and then come to the arrow, and I'll select Helvetica, and then change the font weight to black, and hit OK. And then add the range of start index and word length. And there we go. Nice little procedural setup. Works great. Okay, that rig was a whole lot, and you could stop here and have a perfectly functioning setup. But I think Kyle can help us take this a step further with text animators.
That build is really useful for calling out one word at a time, great for social media captions, for example. But a couple of my clients want the ability to highlight a whole phrase, and making them count characters isn't really a solution. But I think we have the pieces to adapt this to work more like the text animator, counting by words, but able to affect multiple words at once. Nick gave us the ability to find the index where a word begins and calculate how long that word is. To select multiple words, we just need to do that calculation for a second word and then add those ranges together. To start, let's update our slider name to select word A, and then I'll go through my code and add an A to each of the relevant variables, and anytime they're being referenced. I'll make a copy of my slider and change the A to a B. Now let's go ahead and set these to 2 and 10. Now I'll go through to duplicate each of these lines, updating A to B. And once that's complete, now I have 2 individual words that I can select. That could be handy, and I could of course be feeding these into different style properties instead of these same ones, but that's not quite what I'm after here. Remember, our code is finding the starting index of our chosen word, and then how long that word is. If we're doing that twice, we're actually finding 4 index locations right now. But if we want to select the entire range between these, we only need 3 of those points. Let's create a new variable that combines those. So var combined length equals the start index of B plus the word length of B minus the start index of A. We can get rid of those extra copies of the style down here and update word length A to combined length. And we can actually get rid of word length A up here because it's not doing anything anymore. Awesome, time to test this out. Looks like we have a problem. If you set the sliders to 0 or above the word count, the expression breaks. Checking out the error here, it's telling me the length becomes undefined. Right. Remember, we're taking these slider values -1 to account for the text index counting from 0. So a 0 on the slider actually becomes -1 down here, and it can't count words that don't exist, so it makes sense that this would break, but we can fix that. Down here below words array, I'll add some lines using the clamp function, which will restrict the input that we're getting from the sliders so that they can't go below 0 and they can't go over whatever our word count is. And we're so close here, but after some testing, it turns out that setting these sliders to 0 and 0, well, now there's actually no way to turn off this selection. So now we need to solve for that. I know, but when you get into this more complex functionality, this is just how it goes. Nick and I are moving through this pretty smoothly here, but this took a fair amount of experimentation, testing, and passing this back and forth to land on the solution that we're showing you. Testing carefully is also an important part of this process. If you're building this for someone else and you don't find these problems, sooner or later, they will. Fortunately, this isn't too hard to solve. There are other ways you could approach this, but here's where we landed. If slider A is less than 0, or slider B is less than 0, then txt. Remember, that's our variable that's just referring to this text layer before all the code. Else, otherwise, all of this happens. Now, if either slider is set to 0, we see no highlight, which is what makes sense to me. If you want to allow for other styling that isn't reliant on these sliders, like justification, you could expand this out and add .style. And now you can add other styling properties here within that first result. Okay, it's been a journey, but we got there. Let's look back through our controls and re-export this as a MOGRT to test it in Premiere. Here's a final combined setup making use of pretty much everything we've learned. Let me maximize this, and yes, I know that looks kind of scary, but hopefully you were able to follow along and could actually read your way through everything that's happening in here. I did update a few of these variables just to eliminate any possible confusion, and just for fun, I moved the fill color down into a text animator along with that conditional stroke width from before. There's one last thing that I like to do for safety, which is to make sure we don't have any issues if these sliders end up set to something other than a whole number, which can happen pretty easily in Premiere. Down in the code, I'll find those slider inputs, and like Nick mentioned earlier, I could add math.round to round those values to the nearest whole number. Personally, for these controls, I like using math.floor, which drops it to the whole number until it hits the next one. That way, even if the slider is actually set to 2.99, it's still being read as a 2 until it actually gets all the way to 3. You can choose which one makes more sense to you. And I'll make sure to do the same thing down in my text animator. Now let's open up Essential Graphics, and I've got all my controls updated here, so let's go ahead and re-export this. Opening this up in Premiere, it looks like everything is working as expected, so I think this thing is ready to send off to the editing team. Okay, we took you through the whole process of building out this powerful text template from scratch, touching on a lot of new and existing expressions functionality along the way. There's plenty more that could be added to this, but that part's on you.
We tried to give you enough pieces so you can make this fit what you need. Knowing how to actually write the code is definitely a big piece of this, but being able to logic your way through the problems is what really enables you to solve these puzzles when they come up.
We decided this was the best approach to explain the whole process step by step, but there are definitely other ways to solve this, which I think is part of the fun. If you have suggestions on how you would approach a build like this, feel free to let us know in the comments. Nicely, of course.
Speaking of which, as we were developing this tutorial, we spoke to John Colombo from the After Effects team, and he came up with a brilliant solution of his own that you can download and use in your own projects. So let's talk to John and see how an Adobe engineer would approach this problem. And hello to John Colombo from the After Effects team.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
So I've been on the After Effects team as a quality engineer for about 7 years, but for about a decade prior to that, I was a video editor and motion designer. But learning After Effects and expressions and then scripting kind of led me to the quality engineer position that I have now on the team. You know, being able to be on the team and sort of help to steer, the direction of it has really been kind of a dream job for me.
That is awesome. And so that's why you're able to share all of this knowledge with us today. And I understand that you have a preset that you're willing to share with everyone for text style expressions and text animators. We'd love to talk to you about that and find out how we can use that preset.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and apply it to this text layer that I've set up here in After Effects. And you can see right away a text range selector showed up on this text layer. And it is restyling the text based on the characters. And all of this is driven by an expression down here in the timeline. Let's see, open up our source text here. Now, I promise it looks more intimidating than it really is.
It's a little scary, but that's all right.
I know. It's the code can be tough in After Effects. But up here at the top, all these are kind of doing is just pointing to different properties of the range selector, which is down here. We've got our animator 1 and our range selector. And the way that this works is that it looks directly at this based on menu here. And it changes how the text is grouped based on the same thing that the range selector is set to. So we could add, if we were to add an additional property here, like let's add position. Let's make that negative. There we go. So now we can see that the range selector and the styling that's coming from the style expressions are working together. And popping back to that expression, what this is doing after we kind of define all the stuff in the range selector that we want to use, I have these 4 different regular expressions here. Now, regular expressions are
Regular.
yeah, they're very regular. Even when it comes to like high-end coding, they're kind of looked at like, oh man, those are really complex and it's hard to tell what they're doing by looking at them. So I just notated on the side here what each one kind of does. But this is what is key to this expression, because the way that the range selector is looking at this text, right now we have it set to characters excluding spaces. So when it looks at each one of these characters, when it encounters a space, it is going to group those things together as one kind of index. Same thing as if it encounters a line break at the end, it's also going to group those things together. So in order to kind of emulate that, I have these regular expressions that break up the text in the same way that the range selector is breaking it up. So then once we have that, we take a look at our array and we say, oh, well, we want to grab the same value that is the based on control right here. So we ask what the based on control is, and we select one of our regular expressions. And then this bit here is kind of just saying, I want to make sure that all of our ranges stay within what they're supposed to. So we kind of look at how many we have, we look at the length and make sure that we're not exceeding that. And then really the kind of magic part about this that actually converts the range selector index into the per character index is this line down here, where we say, okay, let's take our index that we have and get all of the characters that are included in that. So the way that this would work is if I were to say, so up here, let me set our range selector so that we're only selecting this first word. And what I'm going to do is I'll select these first 2 sets of words. And then, so what this is going to do is this says, okay, we want to get the first character all the way up into, we want to get the segment that, the range selector is looking at all the way up to that last character of the second word. But we do need to kind of collapse it down because with that space in there is not being counted by the range selector. And that's what this does, is this last part of the expression just sort of collapses that together. It says the range selector wants, 0 through 10, but the actual indexes is going to be 1 or 2 more than that because of those spaces. And this will map those 2 things together. And then for the styling at the end here, I had just added
the same way we were setting it up.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have set small caps and vertical scaling. And we could add, if we wanted to, we could add set fill color. And then I'll usually do like a hex to RGB. Let's do that. And we add our mapped start and our number of characters. And now those are also going to be blue.
Basically, the more elegant and powerful, scarier looking, but version of what we just went through.
Yeah, this because what's cool about this is that once I was able to kind of get the main meat of it together, getting all the other modes to work was not actually too hard. But this works for lines, it works for just the characters themselves, and it even works with the offset that's in there. So if you want to be using that through kind of almost everything about the range selector as you would usually use it works, but with the per character expressions.
Any other tips for somebody just grabbing this as a preset and using it?
I'd say it should be pretty straightforward. If you've got range selectors already on the text layer, maybe watch out for that. You might have to go to kind of to the top of the expression and make sure that the correct ones are being pointed to, because obviously the first one's going to always default to number 1. And if the preset also says number 1, then that's not going to work out. So maybe just check on that. But everything else should be pretty straightforward. You just need to add to the bottom what you want to be styled, and then you should be off to the races.
And because it's all linked to the text animator, we can actually keyframe those values and manipulate the timing and the easing all in the timeline, just like we would normally animate keyframes.
Exactly.
So this preset is super helpful, and people can download it as an After Effects preset, install it to your Effects and Presets folder, and use it directly inside After Effects. Is there any chance that this or other textile expression presets would get added to the app by default?
That's actually something we've chatted about recently. even around this preset of whether it would be a good addition to the app. The UX around designing a preset when there isn't really a tutorial video or anything else to go along with it is really difficult. Trying to figure out how to make everything just immediately obvious is very hard. To convey a complex setup, something like an expression, like to go in here and then to, change out the methods that are being used here at the bottom, that's not obvious at all for a preset. But it is something that we are working towards improving, and maybe we could put some instructions in the Infect Controls panel or something. The other aspect of it is localization. Whatever we do has to work in all 9 languages.
Well, Nick, I don't know. Do we want to wrap this up by throwing a few of our requests at John and see if he is allowed to say anything about them? I mean, in the course of this, I know one thing we called out is that justification needs to be the very bottom one right now, with just a little bit of a quirk that you have to know.
One feature request that I would love to see added to Textile Expressions in the future is to be able to create a style that contains a bunch of methods and then just apply that to a range. Something like set style at, where we predefine a style and apply it.
I would personally love to see that too, so that you could do more powerful things with less code. And, being able to define a style and reuse it is something that, anybody building a template would use all the time.
If you as a viewer think that this set justification change or some other update for Textile Expressions would be helpful, the best way to get those ideas to the team is in the Adobe forums. So we'll have a few of those linked in the description so you guys can actually put your suggestions in a place where they'll be seen.
As proven by the fact that we have John on here. The team listens. They want to fulfill your requests to the best of their ability, but having you tell them clearly what it is that you want is a huge part of that.
Yes, exactly. There's always things in development. And so we're always looking at the forums or other places where people are posting feedback to say, hey, what can we glean from this, of what we're currently working on and for what we're going to work on next? So please put your requests in the forums, submit your bugs in the forums. You'll see me in there a ton, talking to people and trying to either help with problems or, get a bug filed so that we are aware of it and so I can hand it off to an engineer. But yes, please file those requests, because if we don't know about it, we can't fix it. When we hear about your workflow, your specific workflow, and how something might not be working, whether you need a feature request or whether it's a bug, we're always looking at that stuff, and we desperately need you to report things so that we can make things better.
If you find something that you agree with as a feature you also want, upvoting is great, but adding your own thoughts and clarifying how you would use that is really helpful, because a lot of people end up using After Effects differently, even though everyone probably thinks everyone else uses it exactly the same way they do. Right. So giving you folks some diversity of opinions on these things is probably really helpful to figuring out how they should actually work.
It is hugely helpful.
Is there anything else coming down the pipe for Textile Expressions that people should look out for in the future?
We're looking at things like some of the requests you guys have made as improvements that could come down the road. But as always, we're constantly making improvements to the app that go into the beta builds that we push out pretty regularly. So check those out. There's some exciting stuff coming within the next few weeks and months, so keep an eye on that.
Cool. Well, I think we're good. Thank you again so much. Really appreciate you jumping on and doing the preset. And yeah, I really can't overstate how helpful that I think this will be for the community and how excited we are to make this video and put it out.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
That was great. Thanks again to John for hopping on this call and sharing his knowledge with everyone.
You can download John's solution from the link in the description. We provided this both as an After Effects project and as a preset, so you can explore it for yourself or pull it up whenever you need it.
I love how useful these style expressions can be. We tried to make using them feel a bit less intimidating, and we hope you're excited to try them out yourself. Good luck. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.